The envelope was already open when I walked into the boardroom. I remember that detail the way you remember the exact pitch of a sound that wakes you from a deep sleep. Not the sleep itself, not what came before, just that sound, cutting clean through everything. The envelope. Cream-colored, monogrammed with the firm's gold letterhead. Sitting at the head of the table like it owned the room. And in a way, I suppose it did. That was a Tuesday morning in March, and the azaleas outside the window of Hargrove and Associates were just beginning to turn. Pale pink blooms pressing against the glass like they were trying to see inside. My mother-in-law, Constance Whitfield, was already seated. My brother-in-law, Derek, stood near the window with his phone in one hand and a paper cup of coffee in the other, and he didn't look up when I walked in. My husband, Marcus, sat at the far end of the table. He had the look of a man who had rehearsed his face for this moment. Practiced calm, practiced certainty. None of them said good morning. The envelope held the signed agreement, a sale and transfer document for Whitfield Lane Logistics, the company my late father-in-law, Raymond Whitfield, had built from a single truck and a rented warehouse in 1974. A company Raymond had trusted me to help run for 11 years. A company they had just sold to a private equity firm called Meridian Group for $42 million, without a single word to me. I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest. I am not a woman who performs her wounds. My grandmother raised me to sit straight, to keep my voice level, to let silence do the work that screaming cannot. Her name was Loretta May Caldwell, and she died with more dignity in her last breath than most people carry their whole lives. I learned from watching her that the quietest person in the room is often the most dangerous. And I had been quiet for a very long time. My name is Vivienne Lane Whitfield, and there is something else about that sale document they had not read carefully enough. I came into the Whitfield family 11 years before that Tuesday in March, young and steady and full of something they mistook for deference. I had grown up in Baltimore, in a row house on Guilford Avenue where the radiators clanged through January nights, and my mother kept the bills in a shoebox under her bed and checked them on Sundays like a ritual. I understood money as a serious thing, a quiet thing, something you protected with both hands. Raymond Whitfield understood money the same way. We recognized each other in that. He was 61 when I married Marcus, broad-shouldered and slow-moving, in the way of a man who had learned that patience outperforms urgency. He had started the company with a 3-ton delivery truck and a handshake agreement with a furniture manufacturer in Raleigh. And he had grown it through 20 years of 7-day work weeks into a regional logistics operation with 43 trucks, 8 warehouses, and contracts with some of the largest retail chains in the Southeast. He called it Whitfield and Lane because my maiden name was Lane, and because by the time Marcus and I were married, I was already handling the company's accounting and vendor contracts, already the one who understood the paperwork in a way no one else in the family cared to. Raymond told me once, on a Sunday afternoon while we were going through audit materials at his kitchen table, and Constance was out somewhere with her church friends, that I was the most reliable thing his company had. He said it plainly, the way he said everything. "You see it clear," he said. "The others, they see what they want." I tucked that away. I did not perform gratitude. I just kept working. Marcus and I had a marriage that looked right from the outside for longer than it should have. We had a house in Charlotte's Myers Park neighborhood, hardwood floors, a fig tree in the backyard that bloomed every August, a life that photographed well. But somewhere in the 3rd year, something in him began to drift. He started spending more time with Derek, who had never really worked a full week in his life and who moved through the world on confidence and family money. Derek had opinions about the company, loud, expensive opinions, And Marcus started echoing them, talking about expansion, about investors, about unlocking value. Words that meant, underneath them, that they wanted the money now, and they didn't want to wait for what Raymond had built to mature on its own terms. Raymond died in September, 2 years before that March morning. A stroke, on a Wednesday, in his office, surrounded by the things he had made. The grief in that house was real. I will not diminish it. But it was barely past the 40-day mark when Constance began having dinners with Derek and Marcus that I was not invited to. I noticed. I kept my face still, and I noticed. Because here is the thing they forgot about the years I spent with Raymond at that kitchen table on Sundays. He did not just value my work, he protected it. In the final restructuring of Whitfield Lane Logistics, completed 18 months before his death, Raymond had quietly transferred to me a 34% equity stake in the company, not through Marcus, directly to me. My name on the document, Vivienne Lane Whitfield, individual shareholder. It was filed with the state of North Carolina, recorded, stamped, legally airtight. And there was more. Because Raymond had also held a 20% stake in a separate holding entity, Caldwell Capital Partners, named for my grandmother, a name he chose on purpose. And in his will, that stake transferred entirely to me as well. 54%? Combined? Controlling interest. He had never told them. And until the morning I walked into that boardroom and saw the open envelope on the table, neither had I. The weeks between Raymond's death and that Tuesday in March were not empty weeks for me. They were the weeks I spent making phone calls, meeting with Raymond's personal attorney, a quiet, precise woman named Dorothy Haynes, who had handled Raymond's affairs for 15 years, and understanding exactly what I held. Dorothy had a small office near Dilworth, books stacked to the ceiling, a desk lamp that buzzed faintly when it warmed up. She spread the documents out in front of me on a Tuesday afternoon in October, just after Raymond's estate had been reviewed, and she looked at me across the papers with something steady in her eyes. "He planned this," she said. "He wanted the transfer done cleanly, before anything could complicate it. He told me you'd know what to do with it." I drove home that evening, and I sat in the driveway for a long time. The fig tree was past bearing by then, the yard going brown at the edges. I thought about Raymond at that kitchen table, the way he double-checked every column twice. I thought about my grandmother in her row house, the shoebox under the bed. I thought about all the Sunday afternoons I had given to that company, and all the times Constance had introduced me at church events as Marcus's wife, with a particular emphasis on Marcus, as though I were a detail of his life rather than a whole person with my own gravity. I did not cry. I sat with it. And then I made a decision. I would wait. I would let them move, and when they did, I would be ready. The next 3 months, they made it easy to wait, because they made it plain. Constance started holding weekly family meetings at the company's main office, meetings I was not told about until they were over. Derek flew to Atlanta twice to meet with Meridian Group's acquisition team. Marcus began coming home late, eating dinner reheated, offering the particular silence of a man with something to hide. Once, in December, I found a printed email on the kitchen counter. He had left it there carelessly, or maybe not carelessly, and it was a draft term sheet from Meridian outlining the proposed sales structure. The terms listed the Whitfield family's combined stake at 66% of company equity and based their entire negotiating position on that number. They had forgotten, or they had never truly accounted for, my 34%. And they had no idea about the Caldwell stake. I took a picture of that email with my phone. I did not move it. I left it exactly where he had left it, and I went to bed. In February, Dorothy Haynes called me with news that was not surprising but was clarifying. Meridian Group had submitted a formal letter of intent, and the Whitfield family, Constance, Marcus, and Derek, had signed an exclusivity agreement with the firm. They were proceeding as if the company were entirely theirs to sell, as if my name were not woven into the ownership structure of every major asset they were negotiating away. "They will find out," Dorothy said. "The due diligence process alone will surface the equity records." "I know," I said, "but I want to be there when they do." Dorothy was quiet for a moment. The desk lamp buzzed faintly through the phone, or maybe I imagined it. "I'll arrange it," she said, and that is how I came to be walking into Hargrove and Associates on a Tuesday morning in March, with the azaleas pressing pink against the glass and an open envelope sitting at the head of the table like a declaration. I pulled out the chair across from Marcus, and I sat down. Constance did not look uncomfortable. That was her particular gift. A composure that read as authority. She wore a charcoal blazer and pearl earrings, and she had a leather portfolio open in front of her with a pen already laid across it. She had the look of a woman who had done her preparing. "Vivienne," she said. Her voice was the voice she used for announcements. "We're glad you could join us." As if I had been invited, as if this were a courtesy. I settled my bag on the floor beside my chair. I did not offer a smile. The Meridian representative, a man named Paul Castor, navy suit, practiced handshake energy, the particular confidence of someone who moves through rooms expecting to control them, cleared his throat and placed his own set of documents on the table. Sale agreement, final terms. $42 million to be divided among the Whitfield family shareholders. "We're ready to proceed with signatures this morning," Paul Castor said, looking mostly at Constance and then briefly at Marcus. His eyes skimmed over me with the efficiency of someone who had already categorized who mattered in this room. I let a beat pass, then another. Derek glanced at me from the window. Something flickered in his expression. Not quite uncertainty, but the early tremor of it. He had always been the one who watched doorways, even when he pretended not to. Dorothy Haynes came in through the door behind me. She was a small woman in a dark green suit, carrying a leather satchel that she had carried to every important meeting of her career. She set it on the table without drama and sat down beside me. Paul Castor looked at her. "And you are?" "Dorothy Haynes, estate and corporate attorney, representing the interests of Vivienne Lane Whitfield." She opened the satchel and removed a set of documents, bound with a binder clip. She placed one copy in front of me, one copy in the center of the table, and one copy in front of Paul Castor with the deliberateness of someone laying down cards. "Before any signatures, we need to address a material issue with the proposed transaction." Constance's pen tapped once against the portfolio. "There's no material issue," she said. "The terms have been agreed." The terms were negotiated on the basis of an incomplete ownership record. Dorothy's voice was the voice of someone who had done this before. Not unkind, simply precise. "Vivienne holds a 34% direct equity stake in Whitfield Lane Logistics, transferred to her individually by Raymond Whitfield 18 months before his death. That transfer is recorded, filed, and legally valid. Additionally, through the Caldwell Capital Partners holding entity, of which she became the sole stakeholder upon Raymond's death per the terms of his will, she holds an additional 20% of company equity. Combined, that is a controlling interest of 54%. The room did what rooms do when something irrevocable has been said. It held its breath. Marcus's jaw shifted. He was looking at the documents in front of Dorothy, and I could see his eyes moving over the numbers without quite landing on them, the way your eyes move when your mind refuses to process. Derek set his coffee cup down on the window ledge. The small sound of it, plastic on wood, was the loudest thing in the room for a moment. Constance. I watched her most carefully of all. She looked at me, and for a fraction of a second, something underneath her composure moved, a fault line. She pressed her lips together and looked back down at her portfolio, and I saw her turn to the documents without touching them, the way you turn toward a fire to assess it. "This is—" Marcus started. "Accurate," I said. My voice was level, my grandmother's voice. "Every document Dorothy has placed in front of you is filed with the state of North Carolina. The equity transfers occurred within Raymond's legal right as the majority stakeholder. The Caldwell Capital Partners' stake transferred through his will, which has been probated. There is no error here." Paul Castor was reading. His finger moved down the page. I watched his face do the arithmetic. $42 million divided by a 66% stake, producing a number his clients expected to receive in full. Then the recalculation. The real number, the one that belonged to the actual ownership structure, the one that required my consent, my signature, my agreement, before a single cent of this deal could close. "The sale as structured," Dorothy said, "cannot proceed without Vivienne's approval as controlling shareholder. Meridian would be acquiring assets that the current terms do not account for." Paul Castor looked up from the papers. Something had shifted in his practiced confidence expression. Not collapse, but recalibration. He was a professional. He would adjust. "We'd need to revisit the terms," he said carefully. "This changes the structure of the acquisition significantly." "Yes," Dorothy said. "It does." Constance's pearl earring caught the light as she turned to look at Marcus. That look? I had seen that look between them 100 times at family dinners and Christmas mornings and company meetings. The look that decided I was peripheral. The look that said we handle our own affairs. And now, in this room, that look had nowhere to land, because the affair they had been handling had my name stamped across its foundation. Marcus looked at me. Not the practiced calm face this time. Something underneath it, raw and asking. The face of a man confronting the gap between what he assumed and what was true. I looked back at him steadily. I gave him nothing to hold on to. "My father did this," Derek said from the window. His voice was flat with something I recognized after a moment as disbelief. Not of the documents, but of Raymond. Of what Raymond had done quietly on a Sunday afternoon, with a pen and a legal form, while they were all somewhere else not paying attention. "Your father understood the company," I said. "He understood who was carrying it." That was all I said. I let the sentence sit in the room without chasing it. The next 2 hours were what they were. Paul Castor made calls. An attorney from Meridian joined by phone. Documents were reviewed, records confirmed. Dorothy was unhurried and precise through every exchange, and I remained at that table with my hands folded and my back straight, and I did not rush anything. Because here is what Raymond had really given me, beyond the equity percentages and the legal filings and the controlling interest. He had given me the position of being someone who could not be erased. They had built an entire plan around the assumption that I was background. Raymond had made me, legally and permanently, the foreground. Meridian Group came back with a revised structure before noon. In the new terms, my 54% was formally acknowledged. The sale price itself did not change, $42 million for the full company. But the distribution reflected the actual ownership. Constance, Marcus, and Derek would divide $19 million and change among themselves based on their combined 46%. My share, based on controlling interest, came to approximately $22,700,000. Constance heard that number, and her hand, resting on the leather portfolio, closed slowly into a fist. She did not speak. Derek turned back toward the window. Marcus was very still. I did not celebrate. I did not allow myself even the small indulgence of a visible exhale. I listened as Dorothy walked through each term. I asked 3 specific clarifying questions about the disbursement timeline and indemnity language, and when everything was confirmed, I signed. My name, Vivienne Lane Whitfield, in blue ink, on the line that had always been mine. There was one more thing to do, and I had thought about it for weeks. Whether to do it at all. How to do it without turning a moment of justice into a moment of cruelty. Because I am not interested in cruelty. My grandmother taught me that too. Winning and destroying are not the same thing, and only one of them leaves you with your dignity intact. Before the meeting ended, I removed a single document from my bag and placed it on the table. It was a photocopy. The original was with Dorothy, of a handwritten letter Raymond had left with his will instructions. He had written it in the last year of his life, and Dorothy had shown it to me in October when she spread the ownership documents across her desk. He had written it to no one in particular, and to everyone. 4 paragraphs in his careful, even handwriting, the handwriting of a man who double-checked every column. He wrote that the company had been built on more than his labor. He wrote that a name does not appear on a building without a life being poured into the foundation. He wrote that Vivienne had poured hers for 11 years without being seen, and that he intended for the record to show her clearly. He wrote, in the final paragraph, that he hoped his family would understand what he had tried to leave them. Not just money, but an example of what it means to honor the people who hold things together when no one is watching. I did not watch their faces while they read it. I looked out at the azaleas against the glass, still pressing there, pale pink and patient. I thought about Raymond's voice at the kitchen table. You see it clear. I thought about my mother's shoebox of bills and the particular seriousness with which she handled money, and how I had carried that seriousness into 11 years of Sunday afternoons and audit columns and vendor contracts, and how none of that had ever been invisible, not really. Raymond had seen every bit of it. He had just waited for the right moment to make it undeniable. What I learned in those hours, what I have sat with since, in the quiet of a house that is fully mine now, with the fig tree coming back in the backyard and the bills organized not in a shoebox, but in a fireproof cabinet because I can afford a fireproof cabinet. What I learned is that legacy does not announce itself. It accumulates. It sits in the recorded filings of a county courthouse. It sits in the decisions of a quiet man on a Sunday afternoon who loved his company enough to protect it from its own heirs. They underestimated me because underestimating me was comfortable for them. Because I was steady and undemanding, and I kept my voice level in rooms where others raised theirs, and they confused that steadiness with smallness. They looked at me and saw a wife, a support, a background detail. They did not see the name on the document, but the document didn't care what they saw. In the months after the sale closed, Marcus and I made the decision together that our marriage had reached its honest end. There was no rage in it, no dramatic scene. We sat at the kitchen table, our kitchen table, in our Myers Park house, with the fig tree visible through the window, and we acknowledged it plainly, the way 2 people do when they have run out of performance, and only truth is left. He was sorry. I believed him. Sorry is not the same as enough, and we both knew it. We parted without ugliness, and I kept the house, and the fig tree bloomed that August exactly as it always had. Constance never apologized directly, but she called me in June on a Saturday morning, and she talked for a while about Raymond, his habits, his patience, the particular way he used to reread documents twice before signing anything. She talked as though she were remembering out loud to someone who would understand. And I listened, because she was grieving her husband, and grief doesn't wait for the right people to be in the room before it arrives. Derek. I have not spoken to since March. That is his choice, and I respect it as a choice, and I leave it there. Dorothy Haynes and I still have coffee twice a year at a diner near Dilworth, and she always arrives with something buzzing faintly in her bag. A phone, a tablet, I have never confirmed which. And we talk about what Raymond built and what endures. And she drinks her coffee black, and I add 1 sugar, and we are both satisfied with exactly what is in our cups. I use a portion of what I received to fund a small scholarship, the Loretta May Caldwell Scholarship, named for my grandmother, for young women studying business and accounting at an HBCU in Charlotte. The application asks them to write about a woman in their family who handled money seriously. The essays I have read would stop your breath. Girls writing about grandmothers with shoeboxes? Girls writing about mothers who checked the bills on Sundays? Girls who grew up understanding that money is not glamorous, it is foundational, and that the women who understand this are often the ones quietly holding everything up. That is Raymond's real legacy, I think. Not the trucks or the warehouses or the $42 million. The insistence that what a person builds, quietly, steadily, without applause, should be recorded, should be seen, should be protected in writing, so that no amount of assumption can undo it. The cream-colored envelope is still in my desk drawer at home, the monogrammed one from Hargrove and Associates. I kept it. I don't know exactly why I kept it, except that objects hold their moments the way nothing else can, and that envelope held the moment when a room full of people who had decided what I was discovered they had been wrong. I look at it sometimes when I am paying bills or reviewing documents, when the lamp is on and the house is quiet and the fig tree is a silhouette against the yard. I look at it and I think of my grandmother, Loretta May, who never held stock in anything except her own word and her own labor, but who carried herself as though she did. She